Hey, good evening, everybody. I like to, centralize everybody's attention by giving something away. So I have a question for you. Anybody ever been thrown out of a restaurant? All right, you got it. Come on up here. This is a little piece called Diaper Dance. It used to be dangerous to change a diaper in a restaurant. Anybody here a boxing fan? All right, you got it. Come on up. This is called Jerry Judge. That's the original Rocky. Literally. Sylvester Stallone trained in a gym with Jerry. Jerry got to fight George Foreman. Sylvester went to the fight. That weekend, he went home and wrote Rocky. Anyway, true story. Anybody remember the Glendale nightclub scene in Denver? Back in the 70s. All right, you got it right here. This is a story about Glendale. Back in the 70s. All right. All right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a little story at the end of my presentation. But prior to that, I wanted to read 4 poems by 4 different authors. And these are people who greatly influenced me and were very much a part of the entire Beat generation. Those of you from Denver might know them. If anybody is from Venice Beach, California, you might know them. There was always a great connection between Venice Beach and Denver. When things got heavy with the police in Venice, people would come to Denver to hide out for a while and vice versa. Anyway, first poem I want to read is by a guy named Stuart Perkoff. And the story I'm going to read at the end of all this ends with a little quote from Stuart. But Stuart was on the Groucho Marx show as himself, a beatnik poet. And Groucho said, "Oh, Mr. Perkoff, it says here that you write a lot." And he goes, "Oh, Christ, Groucho, I write home for money every week." And that was the beginning of Stuart's notoriety and fame. Anyway, he was a great poet. And this was published here in Denver. And it's from a book called Visions for the Tribe, but this is called Invocation. And I marry people for a living, and I always include this poem in my wedding ceremony. Invocation. Lady, I implore you, take my hand, and we will go together, lady, over the land. I have seen your face shining full over the black mountains, a holy eye in the air, a bright call, a shout of joy. I give you homage, lady, freely, wholly let us walk. Lady, the trees stand clustered in council like gods, tall, strong. In the distance, rain feathers like black chalk down the blue-bellied sky over the land. Remember my eye, lady, what can I see? My eye is your eye, holy eye, bright love scream in the sky. Lady, humbly I beg you take my hand. Guide my eye, lady, over the land. Lift my vision, my cloud-drunk blood. I want to ride down the feathers of love, lady, to where the rain strikes the fat earth and mixes and is mud. Anyway, and then during that time in the 50s in Venice, when Stuart had his Cafe West Espresso coffee house, a kid from New York showed up by the name of Jimmy Ryan Morris. And after a little stint in the penitentiary in Seattle, he wound up in Denver, and he's actually on the side of the Colorado Convention Center. In Barbara Jo Ravel's mural, 100 Men, 100 Women Who Shaped Colorado Culture, Jimmy Ryan Morris is on that wall right next to Neal, right below Neal, Stan Brakhage, and aside Corky Gonzalez. So 4 of the most influential people that ever lived in Denver. And this is a poem by Jimmy Morris, and it was published, small press, a little broadside. It was never put in a book until I did. 10 years after his death, I published it. But anyway, it's called I Invoke Mayakovsky. Mayakovsky being the great Russian poet who used to read the football stadiums full of people. And this is called I Invoke Mayakovsky. You, who stood alone in your time, displaying an anger and concern for people that still defies me, I call out to. I invoke for your energies this day. For, my friend, they have reached me and my strength is gone. O poet, let me borrow your ability to love, to insert smiles in mouths of hate, to call out against crucifixion. On the table, a revolver, a cold cup of coffee. We both know what to do with them. O poet, reach out to me this day, for I need your vision and strength. Everywhere I go, there is nothing to offer peace to this body, to wash away the need that drives me on. Faces, 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 masks, giving it birth to the masses so they can forge a smile, make love seem truthful, meaningful, and compromise their dead, cold hearts. Oh, poet, I call out, and echoes answer, shut up and die. Ah, how they would like that. My voice silenced forever, done in by their ignorance. But I am armed, and they give me room to move in. Solitary streets of no one to confront, mountains where the snow falls black. Oh, come, my enemies, let us meet face to face, my bullet to your head or heart. No matter, for you cannot win. I died long ago and many times, and hold only on to my love as precious. And you have nothing, not even a country such as where I am buried. How I pity your ignorant dead steps as the snow falls upon them, leaving nothing in their wake, nothing but more mushed down snow. No, this is not a song of joy. If you wish that, go elsewhere, where all the bullshit gathers in the midst of night and claps itself on the back behind the tombstones of those of us who tried. And so because Jimmy lived in Denver, beats from all over the country started coming to Denver. He was like a literary genius, and, people like, everybody wanted Jimmy to review their book. If he said you were hip, you were hip. And when he died, I couldn't believe all the stuff he had in his house. People like Saul Bellow, please, Mr. Morris, would you review my book? Everybody wanted Jimmy to put the crown on them. Anyway, one of the people he lured here to Denver was a guy by the name of Tony Sabella. And one of the first original recordings where, they're talking about the beats, Walter Cronkite interviewed Stuart Perkoff and his unnamed friend on the beach about what was going on. Well, the unnamed friend was Tony Sabella. And Tony wound up here in Denver over the years, had lots of bookstores, and he wrote a book called The Kid in America that I had the honor of publishing. Anyway, this is a little poem from Tony's. Kind of takes us out of that Mayakovsky depression. And here's Tony. This is from The Kid in America. Isometrics in the chair. Already smoked 500 millimeters of cigarette this morning. 2 Irish coffees. Couple of reds. Snorted some coke, shot at tequila, 3 Dexy Hearts, smoked some dope, Valiums, 5 Dexy Mil Spancels, brandy, Percodans, handful of White Cross Benny, shot some Morph, Darvon for the headache, vitamin E washed with beer, group of yellows, ate the desk blotter, liquid meth into coffee, dunked hash brownies, ready to go to work now. Believe it or not, listen, this book, The Kid in America, took Tony 25 years to write. In Europe, it has been reviewed as better than Whitman. Honestly, man, it's a 127-page poem, about somebody coming back from Korea, GI scholarship, going to art school for a week before dropping out. And then he discovered Stuart Perkoff's Cafe West Venice coffee house. Tony wrote poetry every day of his life till he was about 70 when he died. And Denver was blessed to have him as a bookstore guy here in Denver. In the 60s, when the beats and the hippies were all happening, Ogden Books on Colfax Avenue, that was Tony's bookstore. Anyway, last little poem was one of mine, only because I was billed as a poet. I'm more of a storyteller, but this is from my last book of poetry, and lighten things up even more. It's called A Conspiracy for Two in Erotically Major. We do everything together. Sleep, cook, eat, shower, water, weed, and flower. Play, empower, mistake, parent, work, procreate, inspire, desire, conspire. We do everything together. Now she primps as I write. The perfect lay of dungaree denim announces her intentions, attracts my attention. My lover has new lucky jeans. Look how well they fit, she says. I'm dressing for sex at the office today. Lucky for me, we work together. Lucky for me, we do everything together. And now a little story that ties all those little disparate parts together. And it's called The Poet Priest. When I was a child attending St. Bernard's Catholic Elementary School, I was teacher's pet 8 years in a row. I'm sure it had something to do with my desire to please my mother, and therefore every woman with whom I came in contact, like the nuns and female lay teachers, as well as my intellect, politeness, curly hair, and long lash-laden bright blue eyes. And every nun would tell me at some point in the year that I ought to become a priest. Similarly, when I went to St. Joseph's Preparatory High School, a Jesuit school, my Latin teacher said the same thing. Well, as much as I would have liked to please my devout Catholic mother, who would have loved having a priest for a son, I told all those with clerical designs on my future, hell no. I'm going to marry and have kids. A politically correct way of informing that there was no way on earth I was going to be celibate. Still, I must admit that I had a great love of ritual, both secular and religious. Taking the field for a football game and the toss of the coin, and Sunday Mass, to name an example of each. But as you will see, sometimes fate is kind, and one can have it both ways. In 1979, when I married Marcia Zimmer in my Pearl Street backyard, my publisher, Larry Lake of Bowery Press, served as our officiant. It was a most unique ceremony in that Marcia and I both wrote love letters to each other that we shared aloud. I wore no shirt. Poems were read and burned in a silver bowl, and the beard that Larry sported was the antithesis of the clean-cut looks of my Lutheran in-laws from Wyoming. Photos from that day capture the utter dismay of my father-in-law, an extremely conservative Republican Wyoming state senator. In fact, I'm not sure he ever got over me, an East Coast city boy who he considered to be anti-establishment. After all, I had friends of diverse races and diverse sexual orientations. I came from a union family. I was a writer making ends meet as a waiter, and my long curly locks were always a little too unkempt, too much for the wind that blows in Wyoming. One result of my wedding ceremony was that a few years later, while living in Austin, Texas, I mentioned in a phone call to Larry that I too had a desire to write and conduct rituals, as a witch friend and her fiance wanted me to assist with their wedding ceremony. And then a few months later in the mail, I received the most cherished document I ever got in my life, my ordination papers. The first being my marriage license signed by Marcia, me, Lenny Chernilla, Barbara Timmons, and Larry Lake, who had listed his officiant title as Poet Priest. Apparently, upon Larry's recommendation and nomination, that's the only way this could have happened, I had been ordained as a minister in the Temple of Man by the founder of the Temple of Man himself, Robert Alexander, who went by the name of Baza. Literally, my ordination papers means worlds more to me than paychecks, being published, graduating from university, or receiving awards for poetry or community service. Today, because I write and conduct some 60 or so wedding ceremonies a year, I'm often queried about the nature of my ministry, as my ceremonies are like no other. Did you get ordained online? Are you a universal life minister? Where did you study? How did you become a minister? Well, the Temple of Man, to put it plainly, is probably the hippest religious organization in the world. And this is its story as I know it. In 1960, rather gifted and notorious poet by the name of Stuart Z. Perkoff was recorded during the FBI's first successful use of a reel-to-reel tape recorder selling marijuana to a friend. A suction cup microphone with a wire leading to a tape recorder had been affixed to the window of his pad. Because Stuart was becoming an, albeit reluctant, anti-establishment icon in America, he was just too revolutionary, too dangerous a role model for the likes of J. Edgar Hoover. Perkoff was the protagonist hero, you might say anti-hero, of one of the first novels about beatniks, The Holy Barbarians, the publication of which incited tour bus loads of looky-loos hoping to encounter beatniks to park in front of Cafe West, the coffee house that Stuart had founded. Cafe West was the LA gathering spot for those seeking a life outside the material world of 50s America. To avoid the throngs of tourists hoping to spy on the underground, Stuart and his friend Tony Sabella used to hide on the rooftops of nearby buildings whenever the masses invaded what had once been the quiet, almost destitute seaside village of Venice Beach, a place they had hoped would serve as a low-rent mecca of sorts for those seeking a lifestyle outside the norm, a higher consciousness based on art and love. Stuart had appeared as himself a beatnik poet on Groucho Marx's You Bet Your Life, accompanied by a beautiful and extremely tall Las Vegas showgirl. With close to a foot of teased hair atop her head, she seemed twice as tall as the short Stuart with his shaved head. Throughout the broadcast, Stuart's quick wit charmed Groucho and everyone in America watching the nationally syndicated TV show. When Groucho first began interviewing Stuart, Groucho referenced his notes. Mr. Perkoff, it says that you are a writer, to which Stuart replied, "Oh yes, Groucho, I write home for money every week." And the quick repartee and the banter continued for the duration of the show. Groucho was so charmed by Stuart that he became a silent patron of sorts, encouraging and supporting the establishment of the Grand Hotel and the Gas House in Venice, a rent-free artist community where those who resided had only to keep making art to maintain their residency. But as I mentioned earlier, the unwanted fame that came Stuart's way brought the FBI spotlight and tape recorder to bear on Stuart and his friends. And he wound up being incarcerated for years in the penitentiary at Terminal Island, where some other notorious criminals like Al Capone and Timothy Leary once resided. A bitter example of a most unsuitable punishment for a nonviolent offense, an act now perfectly legal. Now, one day, a friend of Stuart's, the artist, poet, painter, Robert Alexander, visited the prison, but was told that visitors, other than family, father, son, brother, wife, or chaplains, other visitors were not allowed. And so, for this very pragmatic reason, among some other less pragmatic reasons, such as his interest in art, poetry, community, and ritual, Baza founded the Temple of Man in 1960, a nonprofit religious organization, to visit an incarcerated friend. The Temple of Man's California incorporation papers read, "The Temple of Man is formed in dedication to the sentient individual, creative man, and for the preservation of his creative works, in order to help broaden perception and increase the understanding between all men everywhere, who, being unified by the supreme force of life, are working toward a higher social and spiritual evolution. It is not worship so much as a quest. It is a way of becoming, of liberation." Two of the most well-known tenets of the Temple of Man are that art is love is God, the words the artist Wallace Berman spoke and Stuart wrote upon his wall at the Cafe West Coffee House, and that the Temple of Man is within, something the poet David Meltzer appropriated from the Bible. Now, I happened to meet Baza in the late 70s when I traveled to California to retrieve a dog I once owned and used to love because it was facing euthanasia. I had been involved with the celebrated James Ryan Morris during his last months of life in Denver, and Jimmy's wife Diana, upon hearing of my plans to go to LA to rescue a dog, had suggested that I visit Jimmy's good friend Bob in Venice. At the time, my knowledge of the Temple of Man, the once famous beatnik scene that was Venice Beach, and of Robert Alexander's status as a great American artist. Boz's artwork, publications, and personal letters are in the Smithsonian. My knowledge of these things was zilch, but it was a meeting that changed my life. I remember almost being afraid of ringing the bell outside the gate of Boz's house, for I knew not what I'd find. Having known what Jimmy Morris was into, his predilections, I feared I might be interrupting an orgy or walking into a shooting gallery. But what I found was a beach house full of assemblage art, paintings, collage, sculpture, and published writings, and an artist who welcomed me as a brother. Hey, do you and Marcia need a place to stay? Offering me refuge from the world I felt so alienated from 1978 America. My afternoon with Baza opened my eyes to the magic of personal art and reassured me that there were others like me, a notion instrumental in diffusing the loneliness, the Steppenwolf separateness that haunted me. For Baza was a father and a husband, as well as a world-class artist. I got it that one did not have to be insane or an alcoholic or a drug addict to be an artist, as I had mistakenly believed. One only had to love. Now, toward the ends of his life, Alexander wanted to open a cabaret space as well as a serious museum and archive for the collection of temple art and ephemera he'd amassed over the previous 25 years. Many of those artists are gone now, their names engraved in brass plaques attached to a shrine he built in his garden out of abandoned timbers from the old Ocean Park Pier, the scraps of Venice's past now buoying the dead of his clan. Stuart Perkoff, Ben Talbert, Artie Ricker, Wallace Berman, Lenny Bruce, Dennis Hopper, Larry Lake. Someday my name will be there too. So I believe you can have it all, that everybody gets what he or she wants. I became a celebrant of ritual, a poet priest, all because the FBI stung and jailed a celebrated poet and his good friend could not get in to visit. And I married and had kids. Thank you. And happy birthday, Neal.